Welcome back for another episode. This is another autopilot test. I did a similar test about 4 months ago at the end of January. I'll leave a link for that video down below. But I'm going through and doing the same trip that I did last time. So from Spanish Fork, Utah to Kemmerer, Wyoming. It's about 165 miles. And I'm just going to compare how the car did this time versus last time. So if you've watched my autopilot videos, you know that I do these interventions. Basically anytime that I have to intervene with the car or take over. I have planned interventions and then just interventions. So a planned intervention would be something like, I'm taking the exit, I know that I'm gonna have to stop at the light and take over to continue on my trip. That's one that autopilot can't handle, so that's a planned intervention. Just a regular intervention is the car's not doing something that I want it to, or it's being unsafe, or something like that. So we're gonna go through and compare these two to the last one. And yes, as a huge fan of autopilot, I am gonna be critical here. I think it's good to be critical. I don't wanna get complacent in thinking that the system's good enough, though I do think it does really well. And I'll talk about the things that it does well also. So here we go. First off, you can see that the car, when it can see the lines and things like that, has absolutely zero issues staying in the lines. Even on curvy roads, it does fantastic. Especially on freeways, I just like that it does a really good job of swapping lanes back and forth and things like that. So here's our first intervention. The car knew where we were going. It's on navigate on autopilot, but for whatever reason, it was staying in the far left 2 lanes, which would have taken me to go west, and I needed to head east. So I took over there. Normally at the light, it would have been a planned intervention, but I had to take over before that, so that was just a regular intervention. Getting a little further here, I actually cheat here. I knew that the car wouldn't stop at the stoplight because I don't have autopilot 3 or full self-driving. So I hopped behind that other car knowing that it would stop. Now hitting this little curve, I was surprised that the car handled this because last time it freaked out, didn't do well at all. And yeah, it handled it like a champ this time. And then the first huge prop I have to give is in this weather. As you can see, the cameras were just completely covered in the sun. The road was wet, the sun was just barely up, so the sun was coming down. Also, it was coming up from the reflection on the ground. I could barely see, but the car handled it, no problem. Didn't give me any warnings or anything. It was fantastic. So we're gonna come up on my first ERC here, and this is something that I think autopilot could do way better. So the lane's about to split, and the car knows this because of GPS and other cars doing it. And I put my right blinker on, and the car still wanted to get into the left lane, even though I was putting my right blinker on. The car should go into the lane that I tell it to. Just getting to our second intervention. This is a planned one, kind of. I knew that I'd have to stop at one of these lights. I didn't know which one, but either way, going just fine here. And as soon as I get back on this road, I turn autopilot back on. No problems here during the city. Again, assuming that I have a car in front of me to stop at lights. Now pay attention to what happens when I come up to this truck here on the right in just a little bit. I intervened here. The car may have done this by itself. I'm not 100% sure. It was coming up way too fast. Normally the car brakes a little bit earlier. In this case, I didn't feel safe, so I took over. You can see that the car's gonna start slowing down here in a second, but not fast enough for me, so I took over there. And then I actually enabled autopilot while I was still sitting behind him. Just as a side note, one of the things that I love about having an electric car with one gear is that there's no shifting on these hills. So you can see that these cars, the truck and the Subaru, they passed me, and in a little bit I passed them, and then they passed me and I passed them, and my speed doesn't change because I have it set to 67. I don't know why they keep changing their speed limits, but either way, it's really nice to just have a constant speed all the way through. Okay, and this is the next thing that I really have to give the car props for. The snow doesn't really look that bad in the video. It wasn't terrible by any means. And again, the car had no issues going through and navigating this. I was really grateful to have it as just an extra safety thing. Nice little perk to see that the car is doing really well in snow. Okay, here's my next complaint. Again, the car knows the road and it wants to speed up and pass the semi while it's merging. I probably could have floored it and gotten past the semi, but on autopilot, it wasn't going fast enough. So I had to go around the semi. Just something that could definitely be improved is knowing where merging ends and begins and things like that. I know Tesla has the capability. I just hope that they do it soon. And then immediately after, on the flip side, it takes these curves just perfectly as well. So there's definitely things that can be improved, while at the same time other things are just fantastic. And last time Autopilot was struggling enough that I did not feel comfortable to let it take this corner. This time it handled the corner beautifully. As you can see, I'm not a super fast driver. People actually make fun of me for that. I'm usually 2 to 3 miles an hour over the speed limit, and here in Utah, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit is totally normal. So me doing 82, 83 in the 80, yeah, I mean, I pass a few cars, but another few pass me. So next intervention was just another planned one, stopping at the supercharger for just a little bit. My goal was to actually charge here long enough so that I could go up to Kemmerer and then back to Spanish Fork without having to charge. Unfortunately, I left Sentry mode on while I was in Kemmerer, which drained the battery a little bit, not a ton. It just said that I was gonna arrive home with 3% on my way home, and that was just a little too close for comfort. So I did stop and charge on the way back for about 5 minutes. But either way, nice little charge and watched an episode of The Office. Can't complain. Okay, here's another one that the car should have been able to see these traffic cones and move me over safely. I had to take over there, and I also had to change lanes. I was no longer on autopilot at that point, but the car did get a lot closer to the traffic cones than I would have preferred. All right, another long stretch. When I did this back in January, there were no issues with doing that section of the road either. I didn't expect any today, and it handled it great. And my last intervention is this one right here. So I'm just getting into town. The car again won't read stoplights or stop signs because I don't have Autopilot 3 or full self-driving. So I had to take over there, and then just for kicks and giggles, I turned Autopilot back on right as I got onto this 2-lane road, and it took me basically to where I needed to go. Well, let's go over the numbers a little bit here. So all these stats I'm about to share all come from the last Autopilot video and this one. So there's nothing crazy. If you didn't watch the last video, no big deal. You can get a few extra stats if you go to the end of the video, about 10 minutes in. So the first time I did the trip, I counted from my front door to hopping onto the freeway. I opted out for that this time, so it's 165 miles, just a hair less than the last one, which showed 168 miles. So on this trip, I had to intervene a total of 7 times, and I drove 162.1 miles on autopilot. So that means that autopilot took care of 98.1% of the driving on this trip. Now, if we compare that to the last time, it was 88.7%. In 4 months, I feel like that's a pretty dang good jump. I was pretty impressed. 3.2 miles were done off of autopilot, so 1.9%. compared to before where I drove 19.1 miles off of autopilot, or 11.3%. So last time was a total of 19 interventions, or 1 every 8.9 miles. This time it was a total of 7 interventions, averaging every 23.6 miles. Anyways, thank you so much for sticking with me this far. I appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something about autopilot, how it does, what it struggles with, or maybe just you learned something about Tesla. If you have any questions, please let me know. Feel free to reach out to me. And as always, I'll just see you in the next one.